You're listening to the Different Lens podcast produced by the Hampton Institute Working Class Think Tank. It is January 31st, 2014, and today I am interviewing one of our contributors, Kali Ma. She wrote the article Standardization as a Tool of Oppression. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Good. So what led you to write this article?
Well, it was basically inspired by my own experience with education, and I always kind of felt throughout my life that a lot of what we learned in school was kind of not really relatable to real life. Other than the basics, the math, and of course learning, to write and read. A lot of it was very kind of compartmentalized. You never really saw a connection between the subject. You go to, algebra class, then you go to English class, then you go to geography. And so it never really kind of came together. And another thing, is my experience with standardized exams and how they basically force people to really kind of regurgitate material that they've memorized, and it doesn't really require people to think critically. It doesn't challenge you to kind of tap into your own talents, your own gifts, and to really express yourself. And so when standardization kind of came about, that was like the main reason I wanted to write this article is, it's a really great way to kind of shape how people think, which is in once again, very compartmentalized ways. And I think that George Carlin summed it up pretty well, what the education system is about. And I'm kind of going to try to quote him, but he said that, you're smart enough to follow directions, but you're dumb enough to realize that you're being screwed over. So that's pretty much what I realized and observed about the education system is it simply kind of took the joy out of learning and discovering the world, so that's pretty much what led to it.
I can definitely agree with that just because, I went through the public school system and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And, after a while, maybe middle way through ninth grade, early 10th grade in high school, I realized I wasn't really doing anything besides memorize and regurgitating information, so I wasn't really learning anything.
Right.
And while it can be a benefit in a sense where it's still kind of what I'm doing at college today a lot for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And at least it's kind of useful somewhat in the sense that I can get good grades without doing much work, but most of the actual real true learning I do outside of school. And it definitely does take I agree with you, really does take the joy out of learning because the exam is very compartmentalized and it's very much used as kind of as an ego booster and a separation system. I'll use an example in my high school. My high school, we had a leveling system. So it was
Mm-hmm.
1, 2, 3, 4, and then you went to AP. And a lot of the kids in the AP classes, people saying, oh, you're going to colleges and stuff like that. So there was an ego boost to them while we were the kids who were in those AP classes when served kind of as a demoralizer, at least to some kids who were in level 3 and level 2, 3, and 4 classes, and just kind of this kind of hierarchy where
Exactly.
it isn't even really about understanding, it's about who can memorize the best.
Right. Who can get the better grades? Who's going to be ranked number one, regardless of if they, have any critical thinking skills or not. And that's kind of the big issue with education.
Exactly. And even I was once one of my teachers was saying, he made a really good point. He said a lot of kids in foreign classes don't even really care about understanding. They just want to get the right answer. Whereas a lot of kids in level 2, level 3 classes, they might So people look at them as not being as smart, but they would actually have a deep understanding of the information.
Exactly. Yeah. Another thing I noticed is when, there's a lot of people who speak out in class, and some people are, a little bit more shy, and so they don't speak out. And they're kind of tend to be seen as, well, they might not be that smart because they don't speak out. And there's a lot of, kind of attention put on, an emphasis put on, well, is the student, participating? But well, if the participation is, the joy out of everything is taken out, why would you participate unless, you're a very competitive person? You're kind of very much like trying to be the gunner, to be number one, which education is not really about that.
So how would you say that education overall is used as a tool of oppression?
Well, it goes back to, a very simple thing. When you standardize something, you say, this is the authority. And anybody who doesn't meet this authority, this standard, is inferior, and we're legitimized, in treating them in a negative way. So that's basically, and it transfers over into the economic system. So if you don't get good grades, you're not going to go to college. If you don't do well in on these exams, you're not going to be accepted into college, or not accepted into, the top tier college, like the Harvards or whatever. And so because there is a outside standard, it serves as this authority. And people always then start to think that, well, it's not really what I observe. It's not really about my experience, what I've seen, what I've concluded, with my critical thinking. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that this outside authority is right, it's correct, and this is what I have to follow. Even if it makes no sense, even if it's totally illogical, completely unjust, if it makes no sense whatsoever. That's what people are trained to do. And that leads, into society, how we view other people, how we view people who don't do quote unquote well in school, who don't get these grades, because they aren't, their thinking is not, the type of thinking that this standard is looking for. Maybe they're much more creative. Maybe they're much more subversive in their thinking. Maybe they're quite radical. They don't want that. They do not want people who are going to challenge the status quo. So this standardization is basically because the standard comes from people who are, professionals, people who are, part of the elite institutions within our society. Of course, they're going to place a standard that's going to benefit them. They're not going to place a standard that's going to allow people, to, just do whatever, blossom into, the intelligence that they're meant to be. They're not going to do that. That would threaten their power directly. And so that is how it is very oppressive, because it's like a brick wall that just kind of engulfs the whole mind. It basically shapes consciousness, how we think, and then in turn it shapes our behavior, and therefore it's very oppressive.
Definitely, because it can be oppressive just because it's very, like you're saying, it's very standardized um thinking. And just when you look at how kind of the classroom is run, you know,
Mm-hmm.
you read and you listen, but what if um I'm not a big, so somebody, what if someone isn't a big reader? They
Mm-hmm.
can read it, yeah, but they don't really, they better process it through uh visuals, or
Mm-hmm.
or when it comes to learning, the, the listening part. What if they learn it better, through song or something of that sort, that isn't really um explored, it's
Right.
just sit down and listen to the teacher and do your work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also feel like, certain quote, talents are promoted because they are, you'll get a monetary reward, or, it's something that society values, even if you're an artist. Well, if you make the right kind of art, you might, be commercialized and you might make a lot of money, but that's still very difficult. So, it also like the market dictates a lot, I think, the economy and what's considered valuable. So certain people, certain people's art may not be seen as valuable and they may not be able to sell it, or, the way someone dances, might not be the right way, but it's still their own unique way. And so that kind of is a whole problem with the connection between education and the economy, which I think is obviously very deliberate, because it definitely does not want a diversity of expression to become part of larger society, because you have the system that you do have, top-down hierarchy, you have capitalism, corporate capitalism. Now, it wants profit, it wants money, it wants obedience. And if you can make someone a lot of money, then hey, we want your talent, but we're going to tell you how you're going to use it. So
Yeah, that can even be seen in majors where some majors, at least in
mhm,
college now, are held up where, say, you're a theater major or a creative writing major, you're scoffed at and made
exactly.
fun of, and oh, I hope hope you enjoy working at McDonald's or something of that
Hmm.
sort. When really a lot of these such majors contribute heavily to our culture.
Exactly.
Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, in the article you go and you talk about standardized testing and how
Hmm.
it serves as a racial, economic, and ideological filter.
Hmm.
Could talk about that more in depth?
Yes. Well, we see, socioeconomically, there's so many studies out there, that show that there's a direct link between, how much money, a person comes from, their wealth, their socioeconomic status, and how well they do on these standardized exams. So there is a direct link. Of course, there are exceptions to everything, but we don't, want to dwell on exceptions, and which is oftentimes, people use the exceptions to kind of try to destroy the whole argument. But the point is that there are studies. We know that these SATs, whether it's the LSAT or whatever other standardized exam it is, that you're studying for, the programs are really expensive. The tutoring, they also have those special ones like, I think Kaplan, for example, and Princeton Review, and all those providers of tutoring. They're very expensive, and thousands of dollars is spent, by people. And I remember being in high school, and because I wasn't born here in the United States, I came here when I was 14, and I didn't really know, a lot about like how things worked here. And so when I was like 17, so I've been here only 3 years, and I remember learning about, the standardized exam, and at the SAT, you have to take it and go to college. Um, I didn't have any tutoring for it. I remember I had several classmates who had been getting tutoring for like 2 years for the SAT. And there's no way, my family could have ever afforded that. So it's definitely a huge divider, I think. And I know that a lot of people from my school, many of them went on, some of them went to Yale. I know a few who ended up going to Harvard later on. But, the majority of us kind of just went to regular state schools and stuff. Um, the racial aspect to it is pretty obvious. Like, this to me was always something that bothered me, that I never understood how these tests can be legitimized when just based on race. Because when you look at the statistics, you know, traditionally minorities and poor do worse on these exams than white people who have money. Uh, and I say it in my article, is you can either believe that these tests are legitimate and that minorities and the poor are inherently inferior, or you believe that these exams are not legitimate. You cannot believe both. You can't believe that they're legitimate and that you're not a racist. Basically, what I'm trying to say is you can't believe both things, that, oh, equality and everybody has a chance, but then the tests over here, the results are so skewed in favor of white wealthy students that you can't possibly justify that by any means. And it's something that really bothers me about educators. a lot of people are now making a big fuss, and they have been for years, to be fair, about standardized testing, about these racial disparities, socioeconomic disparities. But I still feel like there should be a much bigger outrage, because how can you possibly justify using this kind of exam when you are basically, alienating or a whole group of people? You're saying you're not good enough, and if some people come through, you say, oh, look, he made it through or she made it through, the test is working. But we're talking about, on a larger scale, and it's pretty shocking that, to me, that educators who consider themselves, professors and people like that, within the establishment, that this is seen as something that is legitimate. I simply cannot understand. But on the other hand, they are part of the establishment. They are part of the elite class, and so, they don't want to rock the boat. I don't know if they really think about it, or if they are really concerned about it. But you can't possibly tell me that they don't notice that this is a huge problem. So, yeah, basically that is something that, to me, that I noticed. And then the statistics, kind of, when I started to investigate it more, and this has been going on for years. It's not like, I noticed this last year and I was like, oh, this whole article was just, it's like years worth of observation and study from, different places, and it all just kind of came together for me. And then the ideological exclusion is, of course, you can have minorities, you can have women, you can have poor people who make it, but if they don't play by the rules, if they don't say the right things, if they don't hold the right ideology that supports this system, then they're not going to be advancing anywhere into any kind of positions of power, or where they can actually have an impact on a larger society. So that's another part of the standardization. Once again, is, there's a standard. This is how we want you to act. This is what's appropriate, and so you kind of play into it. When you're part of the upper class, when you're part of the elite, it's a role, and you play that role. It comes with a set of expectations. It's this whole different world. So even when people make it, to that status, they are. It's almost like so many of them leave behind their own unique experiences, where they come from and what they've experienced, and kind of maybe push that to the side in order to be accepted into this higher social status.
Definitely. And I think people, when they go and they are now among these elites, and they want to keep that social status because they don't want to once again be poor
Exactly.
or just generally marginalized, and so they go and actively buy into it, and in
Mm-hmm.
kind of doing that, they actually hurt their own people in a way, because they kind of go,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, look, I succeeded. Well, why can't you?" You know,
Mm-hmm.
just kind of pull yourself up by your own bootstraps mentality.
Right. That old myth, the meritocracy and the personal responsibility. Yeah, it's a lot of blaming of people who don't deserve the blame of. It's, to me, when I hear these kinds of responses, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, it's kind of like, well, not everybody's in the same situation. Not everybody has boots, and not everybody can actually do what you did, because my life is different than yours, and we all come from different places. And so that's, once again, standardization is saying, oh, well, we're all equal somehow. Well, we're not equal. If we look at society, how can you say that? The statistics are overwhelming now, with the inequality in the United States is, I think, when you compare it to other civilized or industrialized nations, it's last, when it comes to equality. So the inequality has gone through the roof in the United States. So, once again, as another sort of fact and evidence piece of evidence that tells us, well, how can we continue to support standardization? And another thing, the racial aspect I wanted to mention, of course, the link with the eugenics movement, the SAT, being developed by Carl Brigham, who was a huge figure in the eugenics movement, which basically had the premise that white Nordic people were more intelligent than any other race, including Eastern European immigrants. And for about 60 years, I mean, it went on until the 1970s. They were sterilizing people they deemed were unfit. And this is the kind of, and I mentioned this in my article, this was supported by the elites, like the Carnegie Institution and the Rockefeller Foundation. And so, I asked, what does that say about the ruling elite, the people who are in power, when they actively support and develop these kinds of movements that basically not only do they alienate people, but they basically go and destroy their lives through eugenics and all kinds of other almost mechanisms of torture, almost, that they have inflicted upon many different kinds of people and minorities and women throughout the decades and really centuries, you can say. So that's another very, suspicious situation. Is it really a coincidence that, a movement that basically has this premise of white supremacy, and, this SAT emerges out of this movement? The results of the SAT, are ones that, that say, oh, well, they legitimize, look, white wealthy people are, actually are smarter because look at, how much better they do on these exams. So the results of this exam, kind of show you really like its origins. It's not surprising at all to me.
Yeah, in regards to this, the exams, the whole thing of test taking, test taking, test taking, really interesting because, like you were saying earlier, kind of goes, kind of alluding to earlier, it goes and abuse intelligence as this one thing and something that's measurable. When, at least to me personally, intelligence isn't really something that is measurable. Like, for example, you have people who,
Mm-hmm.
may be very smart, so-called smart, because they get good grades, but then in their social interactions or just their
Right.
general daily kind of lives, they make
Mm-hmm.
very foolish decisions. So then
Mm-hmm.
we need to challenge this notion of what um, intelligence is. He's talking about
Exactly.
eugenics, and the whole white supremacy thing has always kind of interested me in a weird way, in the sense
Mm-hmm.
of just the whole supremacy idea. Because my thinking is, well, if you're better than someone, why do you feel the need to constantly go and and just look for ways to reaffirm it? Look for any kind of,
Mm-hmm.
whether by hook or by crook, kind of any way you can
Mm-hmm.
go and say, see, I'm better than you. If you were better than
Mm-hmm.
someone, then you would just know that. And you would
Exactly.
just, at least to me, you would just go and continue your life accordingly. You wouldn't even really bother with someone who you considered to not be at your level.
Right. Why the need to prove it constantly?
Exactly. Exactly.
It's like you're proving it to yourself, more than you're trying to prove it to other people. It seems like to me, at least from what I've observed.
Exactly. And it kind of, when that, because whenever I was in you would read about, like, how they had that nagging thought where it's like, why do you feel the need to prove it so much then if you know you're better?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
Later in the article, you bring up the fact that a lot of low income kids don't even apply to top tier schools, and
Mm-hmm.
that such schools give credit to legacy students, not students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
However, I want to get, and I want to get a response to this. Last year was announced that Harvard was initiating a program in which low-income students would attend tuition free. Kind of, how do you view that within this framework of standardization of education? and how it serves as all these different filters. Kind of, what's your take on that?
Right. I think that it doesn't still get rid of the standardization because they still have to take the exams to get in. Second, there are other barriers to people, not just the tuition, but it's like, like I said, from certain geographical areas, people don't even apply. Poor people, and not just totally like poor, but like lower income, working class people. I think that they oftentimes, may not socially feel comfortable going to a place like Harvard. So I think that there are other barriers, not just the tuition, which is, like I said, you still have to take the exams, you still have to, have the grades, and it's just one college. It's not, it doesn't fix anything really. I think it's a good maybe PR move, and it might help some people, but I think that that's definitely not a solution because, if it's Harvard, how many are you going to admit? Are you going to admit, 5,000, lower income people? Or are you going to admit 10 of them, And since their numbers are pretty low anyways, and of admitting people from, lower classes, the working classes, I wrote down in my article, it says that, something like you're 25 times more likely to attend Harvard if you are in the top 25% of this socioeconomic class. So, once again, like how many people are we talking about? And at the same time, it's just one college. So it's really not that great of a solution, but I don't know how it's worked out for them. I've read a couple articles on it, months ago, but they mentioned a lot of sort of these kinds of barriers, to the social barrier, kind of where people come from, as well as, well, they would have to, move and live in, Massachusetts, where Harvard is located. So, it might not be feasible for a lot of people, that maybe come from Oklahoma or, Georgia or Kentucky or something like that, New Mexico. So I think that that's still problematic.
Um, what are some of the alternatives to standardization, given many of its negative effects? Are there any
Mm.
organizations that are currently working to do away with standardization?
Yeah, I know that, I mentioned the Howard Zinn Education Project. I know Rethinking Schools is another one. I know Occupy Education is also been huge on the forefront. There's a lot of teachers organizations, and I think some teacher unions that are kind of, the whole thing we know that happened in Chicago, and with the school closing, I see it all as very much linked together. It's once again, people in power kind of dictating, what how we should live our lives, like how regular people should live their lives. We're going to close your school because we're going to put a charter school there. And it's like, well, did anybody ask the people there? Why is no one helping these schools? And these kids in ways that are going to actually bring out their potential, instead of closing the school down, shoving them into charter schools, which are, going to be for profit. Basically, once again, Wall Street, mooching off of the regular people. Uh, it's the thing that I like about these movements, and about, like, for example, the Howard Zinn Education Project, that it really tries different methods. It One of the biggest things you can do is, like, I think, is, walk a mile in someone else's shoes, is really look at situations from another perspective, from another point of view. Because if you can put yourself in another person's shoes, that means you have some kind of an emotional intelligence, a certain maturity and self-awareness to, take yourself out of yourself and sort of see another person, and their struggle, and who they are, and how life might be for them. And that, to me, is really important, because in that sense, you're not, because standardization is saying, you have to be this standard. When, you try to relate to other people by experiencing their experience, even if it's just for a moment or through some kind of relating or presentation or role play, you stop thinking in terms of, this is the standard, and you start to say, you know what, let's link with other people. Let's look at things from a more holistic point of view. Let's look at, each other as equals and how our experiences are different, not better, not, who's going to be ranked number one, who's going to have an A plus, but, let's look at each other as people and let's learn from one another. I think that's a huge thing. It's a huge, huge thing. And I never understood why education never taught us about, ourselves as human beings. Like, how does our psyche work? Like, what about our, emotional intelligence? How are we to cope with life? How are we to cope with, growing up in a world that is, pretty harsh? We don't learn any of that. You're just kind of supposed to figure it out as you go. And I don't think that many people are able to do that, because if you don't know who you are, how you function, let's say psychologically speaking, you're going to be susceptible to a lot of manipulation from those who know how the psyche works. And one great example is Edward Bernays, the father of PR, public relations. He took what Sigmund Freud, his uncle, his scholarship into psychology, into the psyche, the unconscious, and he made a whole industry of it. Public relations, advertising, through subliminal manipulation of the unconscious. Imagine if we were taught about this stuff, if we became aware, it wouldn't work. It would not work, because the only reason it works is because it's unconscious. So that's another aspect, a huge aspect of education that I think absolutely should be the pillar of it. Because if you don't understand yourself first, how can you understand the world and other people? So that's one thing that I really liked about the Howard Zinn project, is this sort of, let's try to put ourselves in other people's shoes. And of course, looking at individual students, not, the whole as a whole package, and let's give everybody a standard exam. No, what is Johnny? What is your talent? What about Sarah? What about Devin? What is his talent? Let's try to figure it out. That's education. It's more individualized, but at the same time, it brings everybody into a sort of union, because everybody has a different unity. Sorry, because everybody has a different talent to contribute. So, you're not going to be the same. So you're not going to be competing, but rather your talents are going to contribute to the whole. So that to me is, I think, is extremely important.
I would definitely agree there, just because, like you're saying, we all have different talents, but I think a lot of talents that each person has can complement each other, and we can work to something larger than ourselves. And
exactly.
But I think that really goes and underlines the kind of corporatization of education in a way. Just the whole top-down structure, and it's just like, look at how the school is run. Like, obviously,
Exactly.
the schools the other day were based, on factories. I mean, yeah, these private private charter schools and whatnot, and and so that, to me, that really underlines just how kind of far we've gotten from what we think education should be, and are now going into this kind of new era, if you will, where where education is essentially what you learn in the textbook, and that's it.
Yeah. And I like what you said about how the school is run itself. It's basically like a corporation. It's like the principal, you got the CEO, and you got the little, managers, the teachers, and everybody has to obey, and everybody has to sit and follow directions. So in that sense, also, it's very much very hierarchical and top down. So it doesn't really foster a really sort of like an educational spirit to me. It seems very intimidating, which I think to a lot of children school is. becomes intimidating because of it.
I want to ask you, what is the purpose of education to you? What do you think education should do?
I think, yeah, I think a little bit touched upon it a little bit on my previous answer, but it really should be about, creating citizens of the world who are aware, self-aware, aware of other people, who are aware of themselves and their talents, and who are, figure out their own purpose in life so that they can go on and do and apply their talents in ways that will further not just themselves but the common good as well. And I think that is essential if we are going to, I think, survive as a human species. Competition is not the way to go, and that's what we have right now. We have a lot of division, we have a lot of competition, who's better, etc. That is not leading us in any positive direction. It's really all about domination and supremacy. And that to me is a huge problem. Um, if education were about teaching us about ourselves first, how we are actually related to each other, like we're part of a system that's interdependent, so we all fit into it, whether it's, people, animals, nature, all of it together makes up a whole. And if we kind of had an educational system that showed us that really showed us how we all fit into this whole mysterious creation, we wouldn't be destroying the environment. We wouldn't be trying to kill each other. We would find a lot more common ground, as opposed to, in competition where you basically see the other person as an enemy, as, kind of someone who, you're trying to beat, instead of coming together and building something together on equal footing. That's what I'm trying to say, is education should be about promoting, equality, but at the same time promoting people's unique gifts and talents to be expressed for the common interest. That's what I really think education should be about.
Definitely when you bring up that I kind of learning that we're all we all have a lot of similarities. I think that's definitely a good thing. But also I want to go for me, as me personally, it's like I like we need to know how we're all similar, but also we need to learn how we're all different now, and we need to respect those differences.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Um, my last question is this: how can people get involved? What are some ways in which people can democratize education?
That's a really good question. That's like the question of the new century, I think, is how do we move on into a better world that is not built on domination, that is not built on, competition and destruction of the environment and each other. I think that first, we have to like people have to become educated themselves. And it's horrible to say, you're not going to get an education watching television, MSNBC, CNN. You have to tap into a different consciousness. You have to tap into the truth, and you have to finally, have the courage to see through the illusions that we've all been conditioned to believe in, from little on, stepping into identities, oh, I'm, an athlete, or I'm this, or I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor. And people just kind of play out these scripts, and they just kind of go through the motions and do what they're supposed to do based on their position or how they identify who they are. And we have to start to really kind of dissolve this conditioning, and, getting involved in democratizing education. I see all these issues as interlinked. It first starts with consciousness. We have to change the consciousness. And how do you change consciousness is new information. But at the same time, people have to be receptive to the new information. They have to be receptive to what is actually happening. I feel like, a lot of people are still living in denial, about the situation that we found ourselves in. And only when it's really gets really bad, like with the school closings and when the teachers started getting hit with, you know, um, layoffs and uh, lower salaries and wages and basically becoming like hourly employees in charter schools, um, the movement has kind of picked up, which is really good. And I feel like there's been a lot more education out there in terms of what kind of like what education has been about, and that we don't want that anymore. So with everything, you have to first do the groundwork, which is change the consciousness first, and so that people can be receptive to the new information so that they can actually move forward and say, oh my goodness, yeah, this is not working out, let's act. Because like I said before, consciousness and thought, that is what determines our behavior. So we first, before we act, we have to know what's actually going on. I try to speak out, whenever I can. I write, I talk to people as much as I can. If there's anything in, the area, I try to get involved in. There's some people, in some areas that are much more lively in terms of resistance and sort of being a bit more radical. And there are other places like, Texas and Oklahoma, where people are much more much less likely to engage in this type of stuff. So we first have to educate people and kind of get these ideas in circulation. And I always thought it was helpful that when people speak out in everyday life to their friends, to even their coworkers or whoever, it helps because it gets people thinking. So that's, if there's one thing that you can do is, go look at alternative information, go look at the statistics, go find out some information, start observing the world a little bit, and see, does this make sense? Does it make sense that we have so little, so few doctors or lawyers who are, minorities, or such few women in Congress? Why is that? So start to question a little bit more, and you can never force anybody to do anything. So the spark kind of has to come from the person, but the more people get kind of motivated, I think the more it's going to help.
Totally. And I think when it comes to kind of sharing the information, I think um we need to be very open to doing kind of almost anything, because some people are saying, well, if I just show them the facts and I do it as very serious,
Mm-hmm.
very, um, no nonsense way, they'll get the message across. But sometimes it isn't like that. For
Mm-mm.
example, um, with just questioning the 9/11 story and just how
Right.
some of it doesn't add up.
Mm-hmm.
James Corbett, he went and he did a very short satirical video, and that got a lot of people interested. A couple of years later, he did another short satirical video on essentially entrapment cases by the federal government, and that will get
Mm-hmm.
people. So we can't. I think we really need to truly be willing to go and be open to a lot of different um, avenues, because people uh, because uh, not everyone will be receptive to, say, being your 30-page report on an issue as good as your report
Right.
might be.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So,
I agree. At some point, you have to get you have to be interested. You can't force anybody to do anything. And I think it does help when more people start to slowly kind of get that consciousness. And the more you see of it, whether it's James Corbett, whether it's, like Andrew Marshall, he does excellent research. I love reading his articles. I mean, it's incredibly well researched. We have, even Abby Martin on Breaking the Set. I watch her all the time, and that's a way, where facts are presented and you can go into it and you can find a different sort of alternative viewpoint, but you have to be willing to do it.
definitely. Thank you for the interview.
Thank you so much, Evan. I really enjoyed it.